"Don't dig there, boy. Nothing but rot and shame in that soil. That's what 9-year-old Edwin Porter was told in the summer of 1873, when his rusted shovel struck something beneath the dead oak behind the family house in Dry Hollow, Pennsylvania. The boy never spoke again. 8 seconds. That's all it takes for a legacy to fracture. The Porter family had lived in Dry Hollow since 1811, an isolated estate ringed by a fence that hadn't opened to the public in over 60 years. Their wealth was land-rich, but their name whispered like mildew in the cracks of old church pews. The local minister once said they housed sins older than the town charter. People went missing. Workers who built the East Wing vanished after the winter of 1837. A governess newly arrived from Massachusetts was last seen clutching a diary outside the cellar door, but none of it ever made the papers. You see, the Porters weren't just any family. They were caretakers of something, not a relic, not a vault, but a wound, an ancient one, and wounds like this don't close. They fester, they grow, and when they're buried, they wait to be unearthed. After that day beneath the oak, young Edwin never spoke another word. His mother, Delia Porter, claimed it was shock. The poor dear stumbled upon a deer skeleton. But those who saw the boy said otherwise. His eyes didn't blink right. He began drawing symbols in ash, even though he'd never learned them. A spiral inside a circle, a black triangle split by a crooked line. His fingertips turned raw from scratching these patterns into his window pane, but what chilled the townspeople most wasn't the drawings. It was the way Edwin would sit for hours, his mouth slightly open, as if listening to something beneath the floorboards. His nurse, a widow named Agnes Langley, swore she heard voices too, muffled, rhythmic, in a language older than prayer. By spring, Edwin had to be confined to the upstairs nursery. At night, neighbors said they saw a faint red glow coming from behind the lace curtains. Delia stopped attending church. Her husband, Malcolm Porter, began drinking heavily and locked the cellar from both sides. A note scribbled by Agnes before she fled the property simply read, "The boy didn't find bones, he woke something," and from that moment the rot began to spread. The Porter estate had many doors, arched walnut frames, cold brass knobs, and keyholes that hadn't seen light in decades. But none were feared like the cellar door, heavy iron, braced with 2 padlocks, one outside, one in. Malcolm Porter gave no explanation. Pipes, he said once, old foundations. But the workers who repaired the root cellar in 1852 left in the middle of the night, abandoning their pay. One of them, a stonemason named Garrett Wells, was found weeks later in a nearby creek. His body had no wounds, but his jaw had been broken outward, as if from a scream too large for a human throat. After Edwin's silence, the door was locked permanently. 2 separate keys, kept in separate safes. Delia wore hers in a locket pressed against her skin. Malcolm's was hidden, somewhere even she didn't know. It said that the family dog refused to go near that side of the house. Its fur stood up at the top of the cellar stairs. It growled not at what was seen, but at what pulsed beneath, and yet every third night, according to the old gardener, something would knock from inside the cellar. 3 times, always 3. Thomas Cleary had been the Porter family's gardener since 1841. He was a quiet man with crooked hands and a spine bent from frost. Locals said he stayed because of the pay, but Cleary told the blacksmith something different after a heavy snow in 1874. "I pruned the hedges, not for beauty, but to keep the house from disappearing. That winter was brutal." Cleary continued to work, shoveling paths through the white silence. But he started burning the clipped branches in strange patterns, spirals, circles with crosses through them, little mounds shaped like eyes. He said it was to keep the fog from remembering. Then, one morning, he was gone. No tracks in the snow, no broken locks. Just his coat folded on the back steps, boots placed neatly beside it, and the sickle he used to trim the hedge plunged into the earth with unnatural precision. It hummed when pulled. Delia wept, but Malcolm said nothing. Edwin stared at the hedge line for days, murmuring for the first time in months. He fed it, now it sleeps. What did he mean? Some say Thomas didn't disappear. Some say he was taken by the roots beneath the house. In 1848, a leather-bound ledger was found tucked inside a pew at St. Joseph's Chapel, 6 miles from the Porter estate. The priest at the time, Father Ambrose Cullen, brought it to town authorities, but it vanished from the records days later. What was in it? A list, names, dozens of them, children, all under 10, each name marked with a strange sigil beside it, spirals, triangles, jagged crosses, and all traced back to a single word scratched at the bottom of the final page in red ink. Porter. These were not town children. No birth records matched, no census noted them, but according to the ledger, they were delivered on specific dates, always in threes. One entry read, August 3, 1008, 135, 3 arrived at dawn, one silent, one blind, one with teeth. That same summer, the Porters built the east wing of the estate. Father Cullen left the clergy within the year and was later found wandering the forests near Dry Hollow, repeating, they were never meant for baptism, never meant for heaven. What kind of family receives children that don't exist? And more terrifying, what kind of force expects them to? There was a room in the Porter house that no one spoke of, not in town, not in family diaries, not even in the whispered recollections of their servants. But it existed, up the narrow attic stairs, third door on the left, always locked, no handle, no keyhole, just a faint smear of rust on the white paint that never seemed to dry. In 1875, 3 months after Edwin stopped eating and began sleeping only during the day, Delia was seen dragging a basin of water up those stairs, each night at precisely 3:17 a.m. The cook, Mrs. Price, said Delia wore her Sunday dress and sang to herself, but the words weren't in English or Latin. One night, the cook followed her, just once. What she saw made her leave in the middle of the night with nothing but a shawl and a crucifix. The next morning, a note was found on the kitchen table. The room breathes. She's feeding it. With what? I won't say, but it bleeds. Malcolm nailed the attic door shut days later, but according to a journal found in 1903 beneath the floorboards, the bleeding never stopped. Not in the walls, not in the soil, not in the bloodline. Hanging in the fog behind the Porter estate was a small iron bell, cracked, scorched, and blackened at the edges like it had survived a fire no one remembered. There was no tower, no chapel, just a lone post rooted into the hilltop like a crooked tooth. There was no rope, no clapper, yet it rang. The townsfolk of Dry Hollow knew the sound. It came on nights with no wind, no moon. A low, metallic groan that vibrated through the chest, like grief without language. It rang 3 times, always at 3:17 a.m. The same hour Delia carried her basin. Some said it marked the arrival of something. Others believed it was a warning. In 1861, a census taker from Harrisburg heard it and asked too many questions. His notes were later found inside his briefcase, left at the train station. There is no church, and yet it tolls. The bell rings for something already buried. He never returned. And still it rings, every 3rd month, every 3rd night, the same time. But the most terrifying question wasn't who it called. It was what answered. In 1883, during a renovation of the eastern wing, ordered by distant heirs after Malcolm's disappearance, a strange structure was unearthed beneath the Porter estate. Workers discovered it after removing warped floorboards near the old nursery, a stone stairwell spiraling down into blackness. At the bottom, a circular chamber of damp, red, veined stone. At its center sat a baptismal font, but not one recognizable to the church. There was no cross, no candles, no scripture. Instead, carved above the font in Latin were the words, non ad lucem sed ad radicem, not to the light, but to the root. The font was stained deeply. Thick streaks like rust trailed down into a shallow drain which descended even further into darkness that swallowed light. Around the edges of the chamber, sigils were carved, spirals, jagged mouths, crude eyes. But what disturbed the renovators most were the handprints, dozens of them, small, childlike, pressed into the stone as if reaching up from beneath. The chamber was sealed within the week, records erased. Workers paid in silence, but one journal survived, tucked behind a mirror in the servants' quarters. It read, "This is not where they baptized the children. This is where the children baptized it." In the spring of 1892, a man claiming to be Edwin Porter returned to Dry Hollow. He was 28 by birth, but looked no older than 14, same pale skin, same glassy stare, same small scar above his left eye where the shovel struck bone all those years ago, but something was off. His voice was hollow, like it came from behind his teeth. And when he blinked, it wasn't right, too slow, too deliberate, like a practiced imitation of being human. He asked for the house keys, he asked about the cellar, he asked who still remembered the bell. The townspeople were uneasy, but no one stopped him. They said when he walked down Main Street, every stray dog howled, and the street lamps flickered, though it was midday. That night, the bell rang 5 times, for the first time ever. The next morning, the blacksmith's son was missing. His room was untouched, except for a spiral drawn in soot on the window and a clump of dirt on the bedsheets that smelled like old blood and sulfur. Edwin, if that's who it was, disappeared soon after, but locals say the spiral began appearing again. On windows, on barns, on nursery walls, as if he wasn't gone, just waiting. In 1904, a widow named Eleanor Brackett arrived in Dry Hollow, claiming she was searching for ancestral ties on her late husband's side. In truth, she was a folklorist, sent by a Boston society that specialized in what they called regional spiritual anomalies. She rented a room at the abandoned rectory and began sketching strange patterns around the Porter estate. Locals grew suspicious when they saw her walking the perimeter at dusk, hammering iron nails into trees and muttering hymns in reverse. Then, one morning, Eleanor nailed a large sheet of vellum to the chapel doors. It was a map, hand, drawn with unsettling precision, not of the land, of what was beneath it. Her map showed 5 chambers, one under the cellar, one beneath the oak, one below the bell, one behind the attic wall, and a 5th, unnamed, marked only by a black spiral. The sheriff tore it down by noon. Eleanor was gone by evening, her room left undisturbed, except for a single note left in the fireplace ashes. "They're not rooms, they're mouths, and the estate was never a house. It was a throat." No one saw her again, but her map still circulates among the right circles. For decades, no one could confirm what or where the 5th chamber on Eleanor Brackett's map truly was. The cellar, the oak, the attic, the bell. All were known, all were feared, but the 5th, unnamed, unmarked, until 1927. That year, a drought struck Dry Hollow. Wells dried, the lake receded, and what emerged at the far edge of the Porter estate, long thought to be just marshland, was not mud, but stone, a perfect circle of black shale 20 feet wide, arranged like a lid. Locals reported buzzing, a high tooth, thrattling hum, as if bees lived inside the earth. No animals would cross it. Children fainted when they got near. The town council called it a geological curiosity, but Father Merton, the new priest at St. Joseph's, disagreed. He visited the site once and fell to his knees in tears. "It's not a lid," he whispered. "It's an iris." That night, he locked himself in the church and painted spirals on every window. By morning, he was dead, mouth open, tongue missing. The spiral had been carved into the roof of his mouth. The 5th mouth had been found, and according to Eleanor's map, it was waking. In early 1928, strange tones began to echo through Dry Hollow, not music, frequencies, low, vibrating pulses that came not from the air, but from the earth. People described it as the sound of a choir humming underwater, always just beneath the threshold of comprehension. It started every 3rd night, and it always ended at 3:17 a.m. Livestock refused to eat. Well, soured, children had nosebleeds in their sleep. Dreams were shared, almost identically, by unrelated townsfolk. Visions of the Porter house with no roof, its rooms filled with open mouths, whispering in unison. The spiral symbols multiplied. scratched into barns, appearing in frost on window panes, traced into dust on pews. One appeared on the forehead of a newborn, who died before it could take its first breath. No priest would perform the burial, and then came the chanting, not human, not language, just intonation from the cellar, from the fields, from beneath the oak. Sheriff Alder tried to confront the source. He took 5 men with him to the Porter estate. Only the horses returned, riderless, eyes bleeding, covered in soot and spiral-shaped burns. From that point forward, the town knew one thing: the mouths weren't speaking anymore. They were singing. The autumn of 1928 became known in Dry Hollow as the season of red leaves. But it wasn't the trees that changed, it was the corn. Porter land stretched over 80 acres, most of it dense with stalks that had once fed the town. But that year, something was wrong. The corn grew fast, unnaturally fast, 12 feet high by late August. The husks were black, brittle, and when torn open, the kernels inside were blood red. Worse, the stalks began to curve. Not toward the sun, but inward, spiraling inward, as if bowing to something unseen at the center of the field. The children went first, drawn to the edges, speaking in fragments, eyes glassy. One by one, they wandered in. Only one came out, little Maggie Doyle, 7 years old, found at dawn at the edge of the Porter cornfield, clutching a jawbone too large to be human. Her eyes were sewn shut with what appeared to be her own hair. On her chest was a spiral carved into the skin, from neck to navel. She never spoke again, but when questioned by a priest, she wrote 3 words in ash on the chapel floor: "It is eating." And the harvest had just begun. In the winter of 1929, a young seminarian named Elias Greer arrived in Dry Hollow. He'd been sent from New Haven on what was meant to be a routine ecclesiastical assignment, surveying forgotten parishes. But something in the town's silence unsettled him. The churches were empty, the bells rusted silent, the altar wine had spoiled into a black syrup. Elias stayed in the rectory just outside the Porter property, but he never slept well. He wrote of noises under the floor, scraping, breathing, dragging. On his 6th night, he entered the chapel and found the pulpit disturbed. The floorboards beneath it had been pried up. What he found beneath was not rot or mold, but roots. Tangled, wet, pulsing roots, not like trees, closer to veins, and carved into the pulpwood at their base were sermons, twisted versions of Scripture. One read, "The Word became flesh, and the flesh returned to root." Elias fell into a trance. For 3 days he preached nonsense to an empty church, voice hoarse, eyes rolled white. On the 3rd night he disappeared. His last journal entry: "I saw the Porter tree. It does not bear fruit. It bears mouths." And then nothing. By the summer of 1930, Dry Hollow was no longer a town. It was a husk. The blacksmith's forge was silent. The schoolhouse windows were boarded shut. Homes stood intact but abandoned, plates still on tables, lamps still lit. There was no exodus, no warning. People simply stopped being, and the Porters gone, not dead, just absent. Their house stood overgrown with thornvine, its windows dark, its walls groaning at night like a ship left adrift. But no one dared enter, except the drifter. His name was Otis Bell, a war veteran passing through. He didn't believe the stories. He laughed at the talk of bells and mouths and singing roots. Just superstition and rot, he muttered, until he stepped foot onto Porter land. Neighbors said the air bent around him as he walked. He was last seen entering the house through the cellar door, which had no key and no hinges left, just stone, opening like a wound. 3 nights later, he returned. But not to town. He stood at the edge of the cornfield, barefoot, with a smile stretched too wide. He whispered only once. Dry Hollow wasn't emptied, it was hollowed from beneath. Then he vanished into the stalks. In 1931, a government surveyor named Walter Hensley arrived in Dry Hollow. Sent by the Department of Interior, his task was simple: assess abandoned properties for state reclamation. He kept detailed logs, dates, weather, soil content, rational, scientific. but on day 3 his entries changed. House orientation is off, compass spins near porch, gravity shifts subtly inside foyer, mirrors don't reflect correctly. He stayed in the old Porter estate against the warnings of local hermits. He noted the cold spots, the whispering in the wallpaper, the wet sound under the floor. On day 5, he uncovered a mirror behind a false wall on the 2nd floor, oval, shaped, framed in black iron, and strangely warm to the touch. He stared too long. Later, his notes become erratic. It watches back, not a reflection, an opening. I saw my mouth move, but I didn't speak. The final journal page contained a single line scrawled over and over. There's a mouth beneath the glass. It knows my name. It knows I'll listen. Walter was never seen again, but the mirror remained. Even now, it's said that if you whisper to it, it whispers back, and it always starts with your name. By 1933, the Porter legend had become taboo, even among cult historians and fringe theologians. But one document survived, hidden in a locked drawer at Yale's Divinity Archives, labeled only Porter Family Doctrine for the Hollowing. Inside, 39 pages of ritual, symbol, and scripture twisted beyond recognition. A theology not of salvation, but of consumption, the central belief that creation was not birthed from light, but from hunger. The spiral doctrine, as it was later called, taught that the world was seeded with mouths, places of convergence where spirit and soil overlapped. The Porter estate was one such site, a root, mouth, fed not by blood alone, but by silence, memory, and children unbaptized. Rituals were described in detail: the feast of the 5th night, the tithe of the unnamed child, the sealing by iron, breaking by tongue. One passage reads, "And the mouth shall not close, for the mouth is the eye of the root, and the root remembers what the sky has forgotten." This was not a cult in worship. It was a family in service, and their God, not above, not beyond, but beneath, always beneath. In 1936, the state briefly reopened Dry Hollow for repopulation. A small group of families, desperate from the Depression, settled near the Porter estate. For a time, things were quiet. Livestock took to the land, water ran clear, but then came the children. 3 boys vanished from the western pasture on the night of the autumn equinox. They were found 2 days later, unharmed, unmarked, and wrong. They didn't blink, they didn't cry, they stood too still. Each had a spiral burned into the back of their necks, just beneath the hairline. When asked where they'd been, they answered in unison, "We heard Mother singing. She was inside the dirt." At night, they would hum in their sleep. Low, layered, and rhythmic, like voices in different languages all stacked into one sound. One mother tried to burn the spiral off with holy oil. The skin peeled away, but the mark was still there, carved into bone. By the next new moon, 5 more children were missing. None ever came back. The settlement was abandoned within the year. The last letter sent to the governor's office contained only one sentence: "Dry Hollow does not give back what it takes, it returns them," revised. By 1940, the Porter estate had become a geographic ghost, still visible on maps, yet unclaimable. No agency, church, or citizen dared enter it, but aerial photographs taken during a federal mapping project revealed something no one expected. The house had moved, not shifted, not crumbled, moved. Its orientation rotated. The cornfields curved differently. The oak tree, once central, was now at the far edge. Some rooms cast shadows that bent the wrong direction. The chimneys exhaled steam, though the fireplaces hadn't burned in decades. One analyst said, "It's breathing. Look at the patterns in the fog. It inhales." Around the estate, soil tests revealed traces of iron, bone calcium, and human teeth fragments, deeper than any graves should go. No birds circled overhead. No insects landed on the windowsills. Wind stilled when approaching the porch. It was as if nature refused to acknowledge the house's existence. One geologist, upon reviewing the foundation's shape, said something quietly before resigning. "It's not built on the land. It is the land, a shell, a ribcage, a trap." And still from its belly the sound rises. 3 knocks, then a hum, then the spiral returns. They say the porter name vanished, that the estate decayed into ruin, that dry hollow returned to the forest like a wound finally clotting. But those who speak this way haven't listened closely, because the spiral has returned, found carved into playground bark in towns miles away, drawn by children who have never seen it, heard in lullabies with no known author, each ending in a hum that drags 2 beats too long. Whispered in confessionals by strangers who forget their names mid-sentence, the Porter legacy was never about a family, it was about a function, a lineage designed to feed something ancient, buried, and unfinished. You see, corruption doesn't always wear crowns or vestments. Sometimes it hides in bloodlines, in rituals performed in silence, in houses built not for shelter, but for containment. The house still stands. Rotting, yes, but waiting, because the mouths never closed, the roots never withered, and the 5th chamber, it still pulses like a heart that's forgotten it died. And in the black mirror, behind the attic wall, your reflection may not be yours. So if you ever dream of a bell that rings with no rope, and a voice that calls your name from the soil, do not answer, do not dig, do not descend.